I was the Better Call Saul without the drug cartels. I very easily could have ended up in what lawyers ignominiously refer to as the pages of shame in the back of the Texas Bar Journal or any bar journal, where you see the list of lawyers who have been disbarred, suspended, and about 50% of those will correlate to some mental health issue, whether it's drugs or alcohol, gambling.
With this podcast, what we're trying to do is have real, authentic discourse.
Brian, it's good to have you here today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I've been excited about doing this podcast with you. You and I had a chance, I think, to do a Zoom call a few weeks ago, and I've been looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's really good to be here. Thank you.
Well, as I probably mentioned to you when we last spoke, we've launched this podcast this year, and it's called Treatment Redefined. And really, the objective of it is to have good, honest conversation with people that are in the space of recovery, people that really influence the space of recovery, and have some good, challenging, authentic dialogue around treatment, addiction treatment, mental health treatment. So I'm excited to have you here today. I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit, but just by way of background, you are very well known for your recovery journey and a lot of your advocacy work. And I'm going to highlight just a couple of books that you've written. One of them I have actually in my bookshelf, The Addicted Lawyer.
Yes.
Another one is Shattered Image, My Triumph Over Body Dysmorphia Disorder. The Ambulance Chaser, which you and I just discussed.
Being made into a movie directed by Lou Diamond Phillips. Production should start the first quarter of next year.
Very exciting, very exciting. And then The Body Brokers.
The Body Brokers, yes.
Yeah, very, very, very neat, very neat. Well, maybe we just kind of kick it off a little bit. I thought we might weave around a little bit, but I just wanted to give people a feel for a little bit of your recovery journey. I think your story, I am familiar with it, but we're going to maybe have some discussions in and out and around it. Since inner health is in the treatment space, I thought you and I might go down some paths and talk about some different things that we're doing, get your opinion on some things, and talk about you throughout. So just by way of background, you and I were just talking a minute ago. You're from Pittsburgh.
I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So I've been in Dallas a long time, but I bleed black and gold. Always Steelers, long-suffering Pirates fan, Penguins.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a Mavericks fan, so that's the Dallas sports team. I have two brothers. I have Mark, people know, and then I have a younger brother, Jeff. We all live within walking distance to each other here in Dallas.
Very neat.
Yeah. I began my journey with disorders began as a freshman at Penn State. With bulimia and exercise bulimia. I graduated to alcohol.
Interestingly enough, a lot of people do not realize that eating disorders in men is actually very, very prevalent.
Yes, it's about 25, we think, to 30%, maybe higher because it's so underreported.
Yes.
Of all those with eating disorders are male. And I was going through it at a time when, before anyone was talking about it for men or women. And then in 2009, then I discovered cocaine.
Okay.
In 1987, added that to my repertoire. My first of two trips to Green Oaks here in Dallas in 2005 after a near-suicide attempt. 3 failed marriages as a result of drugs and alcohol. One more, I get a free set of steak knives. And then jail, DWI, and then my recovery journey began Easter weekend 2007, and I have been abstinent since then.
Oh, wow. 2007. Congratulations. Wow. We're going to go through and unpack a little bit of some of this. You went to Penn State, like you mentioned, then went to law school.
Went to University of Pittsburgh School of Law.
Okay. So you and I both share a little bit of this background. As I was mentioning to you, I was a lawyer as well. I call myself a lawyer in recovery because I don't practice anymore.
I haven't practiced in 2 decades.
But I did practice, and kind of curious. Let me know what that season of life was like. And I ask only because I remember those days of law school, and they're a challenge. It's a healthy challenge, but there's a lot of stress involved. And I watched. And I went to SMU Law School and in NYU as well, and I watched a number of my fellow students, use substances in order to stay up all night, gain an advantage, get ready for tests, cram all week, things of that nature. I'm just kind of curious where you were in that season of life.
I walked into University of Pittsburgh School of Law in 1983 as an alcoholic. dealing with bulimia and exercise bulimia. I'd begun running marathons. And for those who don't know what exercise bulimia is, it's obsessive-compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. Okay. And so I walked through those doors, and that wasn't quite the recipe for law review.
Right.
And I never even really want to go to law school. My sole trigger for going to law school was I wanted to be a cop. Okay, that would have worked out well. I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading up a baby laxative for the blow. Believe me.
It would have been interesting.
But I was a criminal justice major at Penn State, and it was my junior year, and it was before computers. And they used to police departments, whether it was DPD or whatever, Plano, they would send out pamphlets that we're hiring, right? So you look through these pamphlets, and one day I'm sitting there looking through them, and there are two guys next to me. And they're talking about taking the law school admission test. And they're both from Pittsburgh. They're both in my major. And I start listening. I close the pamphlet, start listening. And the only thing I got out of that was law school was 3 years. I didn't want to be a lawyer, never thought about being a lawyer. No lawyers in my family. I'm the first. And if I stayed in school 3 more years, I could drink, I could binge and purge, and I could run. And keep engaging in the habits that the dysfunctions that in my mind had allowed me to survive 4 years at Penn State. That's how my mind worked. That was my normal.
Okay.
That was my complete normal. I didn't know anything else. And for those reasons and those reasons only, I applied to the University of Pittsburgh and I got in.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Didn't want to be Clarence Darrow, didn't want to emulate Atticus Finch, just wanted to survive at the tip of my nose.
Okay, so that was kind of your mindset going in. Now you arrive, and it's as you would probably recognize, it's a fair amount of work.
It's a fair amount of work.
How did you balance all of this?
I didn't look at it as balancing. I just still looking at it as surviving. Let me give you I was going to class drunk. I was going to class hungover. Let me give you a kind of a microcosm of what my life was at Pitt Law, you being a lawyer. My first year civil procedure class, I'd been out all night drinking. I had no idea where my books are. I walk in and I'm in the same clothes. I smell, and it's assigned seating. So my two classmates on either side of me are like, dude, take the L and go home. I'm trying to shrink in my seat. Don't call me. Don't call me. And then the professor, his name was Professor Nordenberg, he started scribbling on our blackboard a hypothetical. I think it was Penoyer v. Neff. He's scribbling, and Mr. Cuban, what do you think of this? Professor, I'm not prepared. I'm sorry. And he scribbles something else. Well, when you say you're not prepared, what about this example? Maybe you just weren't prepared for that example.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm not prepared. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer. Well, when you say you don't know the answer, right, the Socratic method going. Yeah. And I uttered the F-bomb, jumped up, and bolted. That pretty much encapsulated my 3 years of Pitt Law. I graduated near the very bottom of my class. Didn't even bother going to graduation. It was so apathetic, just mail it to me. And the serendipitous thing about that was in 2020 during the pandemic, they invited me back to keynote their 2020 commencement. And I wore the cap and gown for the first time. Oh, so that was cool.
Wow.
That was very cool, coming full circle.
Well,
that was my 3 years of Pitt Law.
Okay. Now you're a licensed lawyer. So
I am.
You passed the bar.
I did after 3 attempts.
Okay.
Failing because of drugs and alcohol. The first time I took the Texas bar, it was out at Will Rogers in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
So hadn't studied, paid for the bar review course, never went. And so the weekend before, I got a hotel room at the Roadway Inn, which is now demolished, with my bar review books that I'd never opened, an 8-ball of cocaine, a liter of Tab, and a fifth of Jack Daniels.
Oh, my goodness.
Those were my study aids the weekend before the bar exam, and as you might guess, I failed. And I failed again before I would finally pass and become a Texas licensed attorney, who was an alcoholic, who was now addicted to cocaine and the eating disorders, not quite the recipe for the ethical practice of law.
Sure.
And you're probably wondering, well, has he been disbarred or suspended? No, but it wasn't for a lack of trying.
Right. Okay, so you're going through this. You've passed. You go to work.
Yes.
You're a practicing attorney.
Yes. First, I was a claims adjuster until I passed the bar.
Okay.
And now an insurance company that no longer exists. And I went out on my own as a personal injury lawyer.
Wow. Okay. Give me a little bit of a feel for that.
I was the Better Call Saul without the drug cartels. I developed, I call it a ring because it really was, of chiropractors in Garland and Mesquite and all the suburbs, right? And they would call me, and one would call me, one in Mesquite, Brian, we have a fish. And she really called it a fish, believe it or not. And this was the day before cell phones, right? So I had a beeper, and I would get beeped, and I would have to go to a 7-Eleven with a roll of quarters and call her back. And I would go down there in my college graduation suit, a briefcase with contingency agreements in it, and I would sit out in the lobby and letters of protection. And for those who don't know what letters of protection, I'll say were because I don't know how they work today. It is the lawyer's guarantee that you will pay the medical bills out of any settlement.
Okay.
And that is kind of the incentive for them to give you the case. They know they'll get paid. So the chiropractor would come out with the patient. Mr. Cuban, what are you doing here? Mr. Cuban is one of our top trial lawyers. Mr. Cuban's never tried a case. Mr. Cuban will get you maximum settlement. Mr. Cuban will sell you down the river so he doesn't have to try the case. And if it gets to that point, he'll hand the case off and take his cut. And this was before the bar rules changed where you actually had to work the case to get financial, to get money from it.
Okay.
The rules have changed. And so that is how I practice law.
Wow.
And I made a lot of money doing that way. I'm not proud of it. It was disgraceful. But I very easily could have ended up in what lawyers ignominiously refer to as the pages of shame in the back of the Texas Bar Journal or any bar journal, where you see the list of lawyers who have been disbarred, suspended, and about 50% of those will correlate to some mental health issue, whether it's drugs or alcohol, gambling, very stigmatized issue in the legal profession, which almost always correlates highly to disbarment or suspension. And so that's how I practice law.
Wow. You were kind of recapping going into Penn State and taking us through this journey. We're talking 20, 25 years here, right?
Well, I went to Penn State longer than that. I went to Penn State in 1979.
Okay.
And graduated in 83.
83. Okay. At what point in this journey that you're kind of going through did you realize I've got to do something?
Not until 2007.
Okay.
Not until 2007.
How did that come to fruition? Like what got you to the point where you were now making material difference in getting into recovery?
Well, it was my second trip to Green Oaks, and my now wife, my girlfriend who had just moved in with me, Amanda, at the time, didn't know anything about my issues. I mean, I had a JD in law and a PhD in BS. Addiction, we lie. I mean, we learn how to lie well. And she would say later she had her suspicions, but you push them off, right? And she moved in with me, and I continued doing my thing. But I remember when she moved in with me, a buddy of mine who I did blow with was saying, you do what you do. She doesn't do what you do. How's that going to work? And I said, well, I want to stop. It's going to cause me to stop. So I'm in the first stage of change, right? There are 5 stages of change. So finally, I'm in the first stage of change. But you can go in and out of the stages of change. And so she goes away for the weekend, Easter weekend 2007. I decide I'm going to go out to a bachelor party that was down at the W. There used to be a bar called the Ghost Bar at the top of the W. Yep. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll do what I do. And she's not coming home till Sunday, late afternoon to evening. And by the time she comes home, I'll be washed, I'll be cleaned up. She'll never know. The next thing I know, it's Sunday evening. She's looking down at me. I'm in bed. There's cocaine on the dresser. There's Xanax because I was cocaining through night and Xanaxing through the day. A tough way to practice law. I've been high in front of judges. I've done cocaine in the federal courthouse bathroom. I've done cocaine in the George Allen building, state courthouse. And people always say, well, you could go to jail. Well, yes, I was addicted. I wasn't stupid. Right? Of course I knew I could go to jail. And so she comes home, and I'd had a 2.5 day or a 2-day blackout. I'd had a blackout from Friday night to Sunday late afternoon. And she's a lawyer. She's looking around, probably wondering if she walked in the right house.
Right.
I'm looking around, clearing my head, trying to figure out what lie I can tell to explain this Law and Order episode orgy of evidence that I just might not be the person I represented myself to be.
Right.
And all that I could think of in the spot was kind of a metaphorical running home to mama. Said, take me back to Green Oaks. Wait, back? You've been to Green Oaks? We'll talk about that later. I just need a drive to explain, to come up with a better lie to explain what there's no other explanation for.
Right.
So we get down to Green Oaks. Now I'm standing in that parking lot for the second time in my life. She's crying, and I'm thinking she's going to leave. She did move out, but she stood by me, and we dated for over a decade.
Wow.
Well, I rebuilt the broken trust, found recovery, and now we've been together 19 years. Going on 19 years and married 8.
Wow.
So not all relationships will survive that, but ours did. 1, because she's a saint, and 2, because I did the recovery work for me, right? Not for her.
That's right.
Because spouses leave.
Yep.
Parents die. Children, we experience tragedy with children and pets. And, my recovery had to be stronger than all of that. I couldn't do it for anyone but me. And so the other thing that occurred to me was there wouldn't be a third trip back. I'd be dead. And then the last thing that occurred to me was my father, who knew nothing about any of this because I didn't want to disappoint him. My father, who was the greatest generation, was a Seabee in the Navy, fought in the Battle of Okinawa. My father was the middle of 3 boys, just like me. And my father used to say to Mark, Jeff, and I growing up all the time, guys, no matter what happens, whether you move across the state, across the country, or across the world, pick up that phone and call your brother. Tell your brother you love him. Be sure your brother's okay. This is the relationship he had with his brothers.
Okay.
And I thought about that, and I didn't want to lose it. And I was losing it. Not their love, but they had been fed up. I mean, it was my 2 brothers who drove me down to Green Oaks in July 2005 when I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. And they were getting fed up that I'd gone right back, slid right back into it.
Yep.
And I wasn't seeing my nieces and nephews. I wasn't seeing them. I wasn't seeing my father. My mother at that time lived in Pittsburgh. And so...
And your father and mother and father at this point don't have any idea.
No, because I hit it very well, and my mom lived in Pittsburgh, and so I didn't want to lose my family. Why then, and not in 2005 when I was close to ending my life? Who knows, right? If we could figure out how triggers come when they come for recovery to push you into that step, we'd win the Nobel Prize.
Right.
And so the next day, I walked into my psychiatrist's office, and I want to acknowledge that I enjoy privilege, right? I enjoy privilege both with health insurance. I enjoy privilege that I have brothers who care for me deeply. Having that kind of family is privilege. Yep. People come from incarcerated families, broken families, and I have an older brother with deep pockets who didn't want to see me living under a bridge because my career had gone away. And so I told my psychiatrist, finally started getting honest with my psychiatrist, particularly about the eating disorder, which I'd never talked to him about. Well, why would you lie to your therapist? Well, shame knows no hourly rate. I was ashamed. And I finally started getting honest, and he suggested residential treatment. But my ego was way above my 6'2" still. I can't go. I'm a busy lawyer. I had no cases left. Mark was basically supporting me. I'd gone to work for Mark when I lost my career as a lawyer, and I really wasn't doing much for him. And then he said, well, what about 12-step? And I didn't want to go, but I wanted to show my family. I wanted to show Amanda, although at that point I figured she was gone because she had moved out and then immediately had to go on a business trip, and my mind was running wild, right?
Yep.
That she was gone. And so I wanted to be able to show my family, my 2 brothers, that I was doing something. So I decided to go to 12-step. But this was first after some resistance. And I remember him, I said, doctor, I can't go. They smoke out there. I see him smoking out front. Secondhand smoke will kill you. My mind was just, that shows how just, the lengths my mind was willing to go to avoid doing what needed to be done, right? Just saying stupid stuff. But I decided to go. I said, I'll go. I'll go. He said, well, go. And the group I belonged to was right next door to his office. He said, go. And so I got up. I walked over there, and literally it was right next door, and I'm looking in, I'm looking down there, and there's this long hallway, and I kind of, I tippy-toe down there and looking in the door and peeking in, not going in, and then I finally walk in and sit down. I was bawling in the corner in the these wooden kind of Costco or whatever red hard chairs, multicolored chairs. And I'll tell you what, sitting in that room, I wasn't thinking alcoholic. I wasn't thinking any of that stuff. Sitting in that room, I remember the strongest thought I had was that, okay, I don't want to be here, but if sitting here will allow me to, for the first time in my life, to get up in the morning, birthday suit naked, walk to the mirror and look at myself and love myself without the aid of cocaine, without the aid of alcohol, without having to stick my finger down my throat, I will sit. Yep. And that was, I guess, 18 and a half years ago, because I'll have 19 next April. And that was the journey. My journey was abstinence. I was only given two choices, either treatment or 12-step.
Right.
So my journey was abstinence. I don't judge any other journey.
Sure.
Right. Whether it's medically assisted or whatever, I don't judge any other journey.
Right.
All I can speak to is what works for me.
That's right.
I was never going to be able to say, well, if I get down to a half gram of cocaine in a drink, life's going to be okay, right?
Right.
There was no such thing. So abstinence had to be my journey for me to survive.
So to just go through this with me. You go into your first meeting. How did your abstinence immediately start then? Or was it a gradual process?
I went to 3 meetings a day. I've relapsed in my eating disorder, but I have not relapsed in terms of my abstinence journey. Yeah. And I credited a lot of that to a strong support system. My brothers, my therapist, the rooms. I was going to 3 meetings a day because the biggest problem I had was the pull back to the lifestyle, because I'm sitting at home alone, right? Because my girlfriend, now wife, had moved out. And you go through the routines and you destroy all the liquor bottles, you destroy all the shot glasses, you change your phone number, but my dealer's number was in my head, right? So it may be symbolic, but it's not really helpful.
Right.
And I knew where the liquor store was. I knew me by first name. So for me to stay out of that, I had to go to a lot of meetings, and I lived with my father for a week. I walked over to my father's house about a week later, and he literally lived across the street from me. That's how close we were. Came to Dallas, lived across the street from me. I walked over there, and he answered, and I sat down and started bawling and started telling him everything that was going on. And I was so ashamed. And you know what his response was? Brian, I love you. Move in with me. We'll get through this together. Wow. So for a while, I lived with my father because I needed I needed that unconditional so I didn't relapse.
Actually pretty impressive.
And that is a privilege. That is a privilege, because how many families, I don't know, I'm sure that happens with families, but it also doesn't happen with families.
But even with that generation, I think their understanding of some of these issues is...
He didn't understand.
Right.
He didn't understand what the issues. He understood that I was hurting.
Right. That's powerful, though, right?
Yeah. I miss him dearly.
How long did he live?
He lived to 91. He passed away in 2018. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about that time and that what he did for me. And
he was a blessing in your life at a critical time in your life.
Yeah. I miss him greatly.
Okay, let's jump into something that I had kind of seen in your book and just reading. One of the things that when we started Interhealth, which is interesting, we're coming up on 18 years ourselves.
Congratulations.
Is our philosophy is that there is a really strong role for working the steps. I'm not in recovery, but we've been doing this for a long time now, and I really appreciate a lot of the principles that the 12 Steps lays out. I've read through it. I understand it. I'm a Christian. There's a lot of things, religious-based, faith-based, that I can kind of identify when I read through it. And one of our core philosophies coming into starting Interhealth was, look, this is a powerful powerful set of steps that people are using to get into recovery. However, there are a lot of people, and I want to get your opinion on this, there are a lot of people that this doesn't work for. Because this issue, as you know, it's very complex. And so one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was we're going to introduce this concept, the 12-step concept, to our patients, but we're going to try to build programming and services, let's say, in our residential program around getting to what we call more of like the root causes or dual issues. There's lots of labels that go on these things, dual diagnosis, root causes, but there's often a lot of underlying issues that are fueling the substance use. And I want to kind of get your opinion on this because you can become abstinent, but there's also still a path of healing that needs to take place for what's really going on here.
Absolutely.
And I'm kind of curious, as you went through your journey, how did you tackle those things?
A lot of therapy. And I think for you to really, in your listeners and viewers to really have context on that, I have to take everyone back to Pittsburgh, growing up in Pittsburgh with my parents and my mother. Again, I'm the middle of three boys. And Mark, the oldest, as you might guess, that he was outgoing and he was entrepreneurial even back then. I remember we had a newspaper strike in Pittsburgh, and he and his buddies drove out to Cleveland, about 200 miles away, bought the Cleveland Plain Dealer, drove him back to Pittsburgh, and sold him on a street corner for twice what they paid for him. So you kind of knew what he was going to be.
Right.
My younger brother, Jeff, was a nationally ranked wrestler, jock, beer parties, good-looking kid, dates, the prom, all the things that I associated with love and peer acceptance.
Right.
I was classic middle child syndrome. I was shy. I was withdrawn, and I internalized anything negative said about me and wore it as who I was as my identity.
Right.
And I also had a difficult relationship with my mother. And I'll tell you a little bit about this, but I want to make it clear. I do not blame my mother or my parents for anything I went through.
Sure.
I'm not telling anyone how to process their blame. I'm just telling you for me. There was a time I did.
Right.
But I don't. Cause and correlation are different.
That's right.
And there was a lot of fat shaming in my house. My mother, I used to come home from school and I used to love to eat Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can and beefaroni and SpaghettiOs. And my mother, not all the time, but every now and then she'd walk into the kitchen. She sold real estate. She'd come home. She'd say, Brian, if you keep eating like that, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, these were the things my grandmother said to my mother. These were the things I have no doubt in their own way my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming is family, and families is often generational. Right. I come from an old country Jewish family. There was a heavy relationship around food. And my mother was battling significant mental health issues of her own and had a very mentally abusive relationship with her diagnosed schizophrenic mother.
Oh, wow.
So we had all of these other dynamics.
Sure.
And my mother was going through these things at a time when women couldn't talk about it, right? Couldn't talk about being depressed or a psychiatric issue. You could lose your children.
That's right.
And so it was just kind of under the floorboard, like if it was mentioned, it was contagious and everyone would get it. But not understanding that, I began to eat more to quell the depression. And I was already an obese kid. And I got bigger and bigger. And then the bullying intensified at school.
Okay.
And back in those days, bullying was brick and mortar, in your face, you're a fat pig. As I said, you must talk to my mom. And I specifically remember being told I needed to go to Sears and get a bra for my man boobs. And so, unlike today, it ended when you went home, right?
Right.
But the thoughts were still there, and you're a product of your time, so that doesn't mean it ended in my brain. It all culminated, and I call it the day of the gold pants. Do you remember Saturday Night Fever?
Absolutely.
With John Travolta. A lot of people may not, depending on the generations.
It's a great
but
movie.
there was this era called the disco era. And the dress of that era was platform shoes with 5-inch heels and tight pants and flowered shirts. And Mark, my older brother, believe it or not, taught disco in downtown Pittsburgh.
Oh, wow.
He would come home and dressed like that. And one day he walked in my room. He was holding a pair of shiny gold satin disco pants, bell bottom. He said, "Do you want them?" I said, "Sure. I love my brother." But Mark wasn't a big guy. They fit him fine. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. My butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out. But I didn't care, and I wore them to school, and the kids made fun of me. And I was very self-deprecating because in my mind, there was no Instagram or TikTok, facial smoothing, right? These were the kids I saw every day who were going to the prom, who were getting invited to the football games, the concerts, who were getting their first kiss, their first date, who were walking hand in hand down the hallway between the lockers, holding hands, all the things that I wanted so badly but didn't feel fat pigs were entitled to. And it all culminated. I'm walking home with some of these kids, a mile walk, and I'm wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. My stomach's hanging out over. One of the kids goes, ooh, and pulls at the belt, just under the belt where the belt would be, at the zipper, and it tears. Another kid goes, oh, and he grabs it and rips it down to the crotch. And then they physically assaulted me, tore them off, ripped them into shreds, threw them out in the busy street, cars whizzing by. They went on, poof, 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 high-fiving like they had done the funniest thing ever. Wait till it gets around in school, right? And I went out and gathered them up and waddled home in my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities and my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt. And the worst part of that walk of shame that might as well have been from Boston to Seattle, that's how long it felt, were the 2 stoplights. There were 2 of them, and everyone felt like it lasted an hour. And at them, you see the kids going, right, with their hands against the window. Parents look, adults look, but no one asked me if I was okay. And I got home. The house was empty. And I walked down into our basement, and it was these old blue wooden stairs, and they creaked with every step. And I'd never noticed it before, never paid attention to it. And now every creak felt like a gunshot fired into a pond. And when you throw a rock into a pond, it ripples out. And I felt like the ripples were going out to my father, who ran a upholstery shop. They upholstered car seats. That's all they did. Very middle class. And he'd say, get out of here. You're not living with us. That's not what he would have done. He loved me dearly. Rip it out to my mother, who'd say, I told you so. That's not what she had done. She loved me unconditionally. She was just dealing with her own mental health issues. Rip it out to my brothers. Dude, you can't stand up to bullies. They wouldn't have said that. They'd have said, let's go. Who are they? Let's take care of business.
Right.
You don't mess with our brother. But in the mind of a young tween, it was also real. And it was also vivid and real that was what was going to happen if anyone ever found out what those kids did to me. But people knew about it in school. And in those days, going viral meant people were passing notes. And people passed notes, and it was awful.
That's awful.
And so I buried those pants, hoping it would bury my shame, bury my trauma. But that's not how shame and trauma work.
That's right.
At least for me. Shame remembers. Trauma remembers. And they have a way of coming out when you least expect them, or maybe not even know what's driving it.
That's right.
Right? Because you've compartmentalized it. I'm over it. I'm over it. That was so long ago. I'm over it. And that was the first time that I remember looking at my reflection and seeing a fat pig monster, just this ugly monster, unworthy of love, unworthy of a kiss, unworthy of anything in his life but pain and shame. And so for me, trauma was huge in my journey.
No doubt. No doubt. So you carry those feelings along into adulthood, right?
I do. And I still carry those feelings. I just deal with them differently. My recovery involved a lot of therapy in healing that little boy, because I had carried that little boy, that little Brian with me, who was so hurt, like it was a tractor trailer on a chain, just dragging him through life. And it took a lot of therapy, and I'm still in therapy and I've written letters to that little boy, letting him know that it wasn't his fault, that it wasn't about him, that he was loved and he was enough. And I remember that, and I deal with it differently. And now I use it as a story to let people know that it is okay to talk to that little boy to heal, that little girl.
Absolutely. Those situations, I was an only child growing up, and now that I've got 3 kids and two are in their 20s, and our son's our youngest, he's 18 and senior in high school. But the kids today, I just think they've got even more opportunities for this stuff to get into their minds and create little micro traumas, if you will, all along.
Absolutely. It never ends.
It never ends.
Literally, you could be up all night, and I've seen it happen with parents. You could be up all night. Almost the micro trauma is almost what you're asking for the dopamine rush.
Exactly.
Right? To reinforce thoughts that negative thoughts you already have.
That's exactly
right.
I
mean, 50% of our thoughts are negative as it is, right?
That's right.
In a day. For a child, who's going through that, it could be 80%.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I really think, just as an opinion, and I think each generation probably reflects back and looks at this newer generation, kind of in different ways than how they grew up. But this generation growing up is going to need to be, the parents and the kids are going to have to be very vigilant about some of these things, because when you're describing your experience, you're a young child, and as we talk, these brains of people don't really fully develop cognitively until you're after like 25 years old. So these things that are happening when you're in your teens or adolescence, teens, young adulthood, it's like you're creating these pathways that you're going to have to kind of unwind, and it takes time.
Absolutely. You're rewiring your brain to cope with the negativity, self-negativity.
That's right.
Because the brain is about adaptation, right?
Absolutely.
And survival.
That's right. So when you tell that story and I listen to you and I kind of am putting these pieces together, you're going through, you're going to your meetings, and you're basically holding yourself accountable, you're maintaining abstinence. At the same time, you're really working hard on repairing the traumas in your life that really, those little voices that you carry with you every day or in certain situations, like you said, that trigger you and you're not sure why they trigger you, but you're having to repair that over time through therapy.
Absolutely.
Right?
I'm in therapy today. It's an ongoing process. I still deal with negative body image today, but there's a distinction, right? Everyone at one day or another looks in the mirror and says, that sucks. Right? That's normative discontent that human beings go through. When it is so intense to the point where, using those words becomes who you are, and you turn to substances or something else I've also been addicted to steroids. You turn to different substances to try to placate that and tamp it down. That's the problem.
That's right.
Right. That's why I build my toolbox. Right. Yep. So I'd never tell anyone when I tell my story that recovery is blue sky. This is especially true in the eating disorder realm, where people just don't want those thoughts.
Right.
Right. And I say, look, it's how you deal with them that's important, because there are going to be thoughts in life that are bad.
That's right.
Right. Whether it's this, that, or the other thing. It's how we deal with them, how we process them, how long they last.
Yep. So at this point in time in your life, you're continuing to do a fair amount of advocacy work. You're speaking, you're talking, you're educating us.
I speak all over the country and in Canada. I've written 2 books on my both eating disorder and body image issues. And I just enjoy it. And people reach out to me in email and wherever, Twitter. And they take different things from when I speak. I remember when I started here, when I started speaking after I wrote Shattered Image, I started speaking at local Rotary clubs, right? Because you don't get paid, but you get a free lunch or a free breakfast. And if you mess up, no one's really going to say anything.
Right.
You can practice the art of public speaking, which is important.
That's right.
And so I walked into my very first Rotary Club talking about Shattered Image, eating disorders and body image. It was a bunch of 60-year-old men, and I'm looking around going, oh, man, this is going to be brutal.
It's going to be a tough crowd.
So I gave my talk, and a couple people came afterwards, and I talked about family and what my father had said to us, that they had children and grandchildren. They want to ask about that. And then I get home, and I was very active on Twitter. I open up Twitter, and there was a direct message from a young girl. She said, you don't know me, but my father was at your talk, and he's a lawyer. And we are now having dinner together for the first time in a year. Thank you.
Wow.
So you never know what part of your experience is going to resonate.
I totally agree with that. I do. I was reading through a little bit of over this weekend, just a little bit of kind of some of the work that you've been doing. I was kind of interested in this, the Pitt Law Student Wellness Fund. Yeah. That you helped, I believe you helped put that together.
It was, I seeded it.
Yeah.
And they named it after me. So that's, I'm not huge on legacy, but that's cool.
I think it's pretty cool too. But just based on our earlier conversation with a lot of these students that are in law school or becoming doctors or in these really high pressure types of situations, there need to be some tools, I think, for them to help cope. Again, going back to just my law school days, you could see the stress really coming out in a lot of the student body.
Sure.
Particularly, everybody's kind of fighting to try to be here or there and make law review. You name it. There's a lot of pressure, and you're dealing with a lot of, frankly, really good students, that are kind of pros at what they do. They're good students. And I just elaborate just to touch on kind of what this fund was really doing. What was its intent as it related to the law school and the kids?
I set up the fund with the with the conversation that it would be used primarily for mental health. Yeah. They've used it to help students get housing. They've used it to help students get therapy. Yeah. Mental health is many prongs, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at, I'm sure you're familiar with SAMHSA.
Yes.
If you look at the SAMHSA definition of addiction, the words you don't see are sobriety and abstinence. Mm. Mental health and the art, getting sober and living, it's about how are you things with your family? How are things with your children? How are things at work? All these different prongs
That's right.
of a positive life.
That's right.
Right? And that is kind of the conversation I had with Pitt. It didn't have to be related to sobriety, right?
That's right.
Whatever are the prongs of a positive experience. Mm-hmm. And that's what they do.
I think it's really smart. We actually use a metric very similar to that, to how we've measured outcomes. It came from a longtime addiction researcher named Dr. Walter Ling out of UCLA, and he set up it's a very simple, but it's a very practical way to look at your quality of life.
All the prongs of a good quality of life.
That's right. They're good indicators of how you were doing.
Yeah. It's way back when the pandemic killed it, but I passed the test to be a peer recovery specialist.
Yeah.
I took the test, I passed it, but then I was doing my, you had to get clinical hours or practicum, they call it, not clinical. And the pandemic hit, right? I was doing it at Homeward Bound.
Yep.
And then the pandemic hit and I never went back. But, when people reach out to me and I talk to them, I don't ask them about sobriety and this. What does your life look like now? What do you want it to look like 30 days from now, right? And I remember vividly the guy who taught it, and he wanted to give an exaggerated example of how to approach peer recovery. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, some guy's doing 2 grams of cocaine a week. And I asked him, what do you want your life to look like in 30 days? He said, well, if I could get down to 0.5 gram a week, I think I can function. Everything's going to be great. I'm not going to say to him, no, you have to get sober. Right? Because that's putting me on him. I'm going to say, sorry about that. What is your plan for doing that?
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
And how are you going to do that? And it wouldn't be my path. But okay, let's form a plan to do that. And then we'll see what your life is like then.
Right.
And so one guy got up and walked out. So I'm not doing that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, one guy, big, hardcore 12. I said that's quote unquote nuts. I'm not doing that. And it was just an example of a person-centered recovery.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I do. I said, what is your life like? Family and friends at work, and that's what I focus on. Yep. And if it's bad, why do you think it's bad?
Right. Love it. So at this time in your life, when you, in terms of how you kind of keep yourself, I guess emotionally healthy as well as abstinent, is there a physical component to it that you try to incorporate in your life?
Sure. I'm always trying to stay as healthy as I can at my age, and that involves, I have an artificial hip, so my marathon days are long behind me. But it usually involves, working out a few times a week, and I have to be very careful because my greatest recovery struggle today is my relationship with exercise and food. Mm-hmm. Because of my exercise bulimia, my mind can automatically, I'll look at a bagel and go, click, 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 click. The internal calculator, that's 200 calories, I do this. My wife's good about keeping me centered.
Yep.
So I do that. I've been taking vocal lessons for 3 years to learn to sing. Why? Because I wanted to.
Sure.
I wanted to be able to walk into a karaoke bar sober and belt out a song without having to get drunk to do it.
Have you have your vocals improved by doing it?
Oh yeah, yes.
So
yes.
you could take someone like me who isn't a great singer and
I
turn
don't
me
know.
into a good one.
I did a keynote in Anaheim, and one of the cool things they did at this conference was instead of doing like the dinner or the lunch where the catered lunch in a hotel, they took that money and they rented out the House of Blues.
Yep.
And where you could, they had just the food stands, and where we all did karaoke. And I'm waiting my turn, and these people were good. And I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah, some of them are outstanding.
And I'm like, okay, now I feel really nervous. But I didn't drink. This wasn't a recovery convention.
Yep.
So they were drinking, and I did it sober.
That's so funny. It's so funny. Well, as you kind of look at
talk about imposter syndrome and vulnerability. Yes,
exactly. So as you kind of sit from your vantage point, you're traveling around the country, you're talking, you're giving back, you're advocating for different causes. Just as you look out over, like, say, the next 10 years or so, just in your mind, how do you see kind of treatment evolving? Do you see some things you're keeping an eye on? Do you see advancements in some areas?
I am. I always keep an eye on how we talk about fentanyl.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen I'm very vocal about that and very vocal about, unfortunately, I see this. You want to talk about this? Because I see it in the recovery
Sure.
Where there is so much stigma. Let's say a hypothetical. Child overdoses fatally.
Right.
Okay. They find a marijuana and fentanyl in the blood.
Right.
It automatically becomes laced marijuana, right? Which we know from science really can't happen because they have different burn rates, right? You can't just sprinkle.
Right.
Yeah. So what is probably happening is poly drug use, right? The child took something that was unfortunately had fentanyl with it, whether it was a pill,
Probably right.
and also smoked marijuana. But there's so much stigma with the parent. The parent doesn't want to believe that their child would take something that was laced with fentanyl. They didn't intentionally take it. They intentionally maybe have taken the pill, right?
Right.
But the pill had something unexpected in it. And a tragic.
That's right.
And so the narrative becomes, and everyone goes along with it, that the child died from laced marijuana,
Right.
which is scientifically, at least today, as we know science, because of differing burn rates, impossible.
Okay.
And so I see things like that, and I've had people say to me, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a nurse. It was in their blood. Well, learn the difference between cause and correlation, right?
Right.
Because two things are in their blood doesn't mean they were taking simultaneously.
Right. Right.
And so it just means that both things are in their blood. So that's one of the things I'm very in the narrative that officers can overdose by being around fentanyl and things like that, which is untrue.
Okay.
And so I'm very vocal on those things. Fentanyl is dangerous, illicit, right? We're
Sure.
talking about illicit.
Right.
It is dangerous. It is taking too many of our children. It is taking too many of our adults. Taking too many adults. The overdose numbers are dropping. I think in regards to education, naloxone, the wide availability and stigma reduction of naloxone, and education, right?
Right.
But I'm very active in those. And
What about the area of like marijuana use? What are your where are you kind of looking at with that?
I'm not. I've never been a fan of marijuana because it never gave me the high I was looking for.
Yeah.
I didn't need help to eat a whole pizza.
Right.
Yeah, I was looking for the cocaine high.
Sure.
So I never experimented with heroin either. I could have. I knew people who did it because that wasn't the high. I saw them high, and that wasn't what I was looking for.
Right.
I wanted to feel better about myself and be right?
Right.
Have the guts to talk to that girl.
Yep. Yeah.
So cocaine was the choice for me because of those reasons.
Right. The reason I ask, just as you're thinking about this, is, Dr. Urschel, he's one of our co-founding doctors, and we talk about these. He's pretty well read and does speak on just marijuana use today, the levels of THC, all of the things that I'm sure you're pretty familiar with. And we just got back from a lecture in Oklahoma City on this. But from my vantage point, being a non-clinician, but just watching what goes on our facility and patients coming in, and what I've seen in the last, it feels like, and we were talking about this on another podcast a few weeks ago, that over the last probably 3 years, I would say, I feel like we are seeing, compared to like the first 10 years we were open, last 3 years, I have seen more patients experiencing just a deeper level of psychosis. And there's maybe some correlation. I'm not saying it's causation, but there is some correlation in here with, I think, a lot of marijuana use that maybe they don't know what ingredients are in it or the levels of THC or the synthetics, whatever it might be, but there is something real going on here that I'm trying to kind of better understand.
I think there's not enough data to really, I think people are looking at the data.
That's right.
And I know people who will swear it's a gateway drug. Well, my response is that anything can be gateway to anything, right? It depends on the person, the trauma. Someone like me, marijuana may very well have been a gateway drug to something else, right?
Exactly.
But it just causes no correlation.
Yep.
But I acknowledge that the potency is just off the charts from the days when I used it. I acknowledge reading anecdotes about psychosis. I'm just not a clinician. I'm not a data scientist.
Right.
I think it deserves a lot more research.
Sure.
I just read a story about where, again, I didn't look into it, but how do we, with the legalization, how can we tell if someone is so impaired like we can with alcohol, right? When I got DWI, it blew a 1-1 back when it was 1-0. We don't have the pieces in place with the science to be able to tell someone if that is what is impairing someone when they get in a car. So I think we have a long way to go. Science has a long way to go, but I acknowledge that this needs to be studied.
Yep.
And I am a science, I'm a data person, right? And anytime someone will push back at me, I'll say don't tell me what you've seen.
Right.
Tell me what the data says. What you've seen is what you've seen. It was like with the fentanyl in the blood or with marijuana. This person who was a nurse said to me, I saw the blood. You're wrong. I saw the tox report. Well, yeah, you saw it and it had this and this, but that doesn't mean what you think it means.
That's right.
And so if the data supports it, I'm with the data.
Yep. Makes sense. It does.
But it's I follow it. But again, I've probably tried marijuana 3 times in my life. It just wasn't anything that it did anything for me.
Yeah. It's been interesting to watch. And just seeing it's a lot of young adults.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I've done enough cocaine to bring down a herd of elephants. So it's just whatever your drug of choice is, right?
Yep. Well, I have to tell you, I think the work that you're doing is inspiring. To be honest with you, I'm glad that your sobriety is something to be applauded.
Oh, thank you.
And,
Everyone's is.
It is.
Everyone's is.
It
it's
is.
Hard.
And it just in talking to you, it feels like you've got a good quality of life. You're giving back, and our society needs it. We have a hurting population, and I think we've always had that, but I feel like just even post-COVID, we just have a hurting group of people. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety in our youth that are becoming adults, and I feel like we're the canary in the coal mines because we're on the treatment level. We're getting the phone calls every day. We're treating our patients, and I just see a heightened, intensive level of hurt, it feels like.
And I see it in the legal profession. As we talked about, I don't know if you're familiar with the Betty Ford ABA Hazelden study that showed that lawyers struggle with alcohol at a rate 21%. If you're female, it can go up to 33% under 10 years of practice. There was a subsequent study a few years ago. Do you know Patrick Krill?
Yes.
He did the guy behind all these studies. They came out of the D.C. and California bar that showed it ticked up to 40% during the pandemic for female lawyers. So I'll be curious into the next study that shows, with the heightened awareness, right? Because it's a lot different from when I was coming up.
That's right.
To see how things are. But
what do you think it is? Just diving in on that real quick. What do you think it
lawyers,
is?
One, we're a thinking profession, right? I think for the tendency to believe we can think our way out of a problem before it gets too bad. We're a type A profession. I'm not a type A. If you believe in the Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
Also, we can be a proud profession where we think that, okay, I'll deal with this issue. And it's like we talked about it, but how did you get there, right? Okay, you're sober, but are you dealing with how you got there?
Right.
Divorce, childhood trauma. And a thinking profession might believe that they can, and again, I'm just generalizing here,
Sure.
believe you can think your way out of trauma.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to phrase it. I haven't thought of it quite like that. That's
So
a good point.
those are some things, right? Is there just pure stress-induced substance use? Yes. But in my anecdotal experience, there's usually something deeper.
Yeah.
That's just my non-clinical anecdotal.
I think you're probably right. I was feel like there's a little heightened awareness around this with the loss of the Dallas Cowboy last week, that Marshawn Neal.
And it isn't a tragedy, but isn't it a shame that we only have public conversations?
I agree with that.
When it's a celebrity? I
agree with that. No, we actually had an opportunity to jump on a call with a representative from WBAP last week, and we were talking through this, and I was like, you're seeing a high-profile person that's getting, now we're talking about it, but we see these things on the daily.
And the talk, and then the talk that the news cycle will run, except in his circles where people will deal with this pain and trauma for their lives. But, learn how to talk to people. You're not always going to spot the signs. I know from fact that it comes on fast, right? For me, it was boom, boom, and I thought I was doing my family a favor by ending my life.
Right.
It comes on really fast, at least it did for me. But you can take mental health first aid. You can do all these different things to at least have a basis, have some groundwork for spotting the signs. That doesn't acknowledge you're always going to see them.
That's right.
Right? Because you can't be around someone 24 hours a day.
Exactly.
And people can be good at saying, I'm okay. But, we should ask anyways.
We should.
We should ask anyways, and we should repeat it. And it may not be you, and I've said it myself. I'm fine. I'm fine. I said it to my family, said it to my friends. But if more people ask, maybe it's the next person, or maybe it's the person after that. And it's cumulative.
That's right.
Right? And maybe it's the third time, and they say, you know what? Maybe I will take some steps. Because the first step is scary.
That's right.
It's first because there's just so much stigma. If I take it, I'm weak. If I take it, I'm going to lose my career as a lawyer. If I take it, I will no longer play professional sports.
That's exactly right.
All of these thoughts that seem perfectly real.
100%. Those are all of the obstacles for people seeking that, like you said, that first step and getting the help they need. Needs to be more conversation around that.
It does, because the stigma is a brick wall. It can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, this has been a ball. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed spending time with you, and sincerely, I appreciate everything that you're doing, and you're helping to facilitate great conversation that we need to have. So just thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I really always enjoy talking about this.
I enjoyed
especially,
it.
when you're very knowledgeable in the field.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.